chapter 18. This is the plyometric chapter. Nasm also refers to it as the reactive training, but basically the same premise that you're going to see, same concepts that you're going to see. It's just they use two different terminologies, but the plyometric base. So let's dive right in here. We definitely are going to look at a shorter chapter here, simply because of the fact that it's one of those things that it doesn't take a lot to explain based on the previous information that you have, especially going back to the chapters when we talked about, early on with muscle base, and also with trying to make sure that, we go back to the exercise science, the metabolic base, and then let's see, I'm just trying to think of the other and so the human movement science chapter, which would be chapter 7. So chapters 5 and chapter 7 kind of give you some insight onto this. So what is this whole aspect of plyometrics? The problem is that we always assume that just doing a simple box jump is plyometric. Well, in some ways it is. In other ways, we're talking about something that's very explosive, awesome, bounding, jumping, forceful movement of both our upper and lower bodies. So it just depends on what it is. But really what we want to think about is something called a very fast stretch shortening cycle. All right. So when we talk about that, yeah, that's where jumping does come into play. But let's be more specific with that. If you look at the second bullet point, down in this region here where it says plyometrics, really what you're getting into is, like it says here, exercises that generate quick, powerful movements involving an explosive concentric muscle contraction preceded by eccentric muscle action. So what that's saying really is going back to our muscular system, going back to the human movement science space. When we talk about eccentric muscle action, that is the lengthening phase. So when you go to jump, when you go to land on something and you absorb that force, what you're doing is you're causing an eccentric or lengthening of that muscle. But with plyometrics, it's not just okay, we're going to absorb the force and then, okay, wait, 3, 2, 1, and then explode. No, that's not what we want to do. We want to think about that really rapid contraction. So it's absorbing eccentric force, absorbing eccentric force, followed immediately by a very rapid, very explosive concentric or shortening of the muscle fiber. Now, there are some things that are going to come into play also within this chapter that you may not see directly in this slide, but understand that when we have plyometrics, there's that in-between phase between the eccentric and concentric. What we're trying to do is limit what we call the amortization phase. amortization. That's amortization. It's the in-between segment of the switch from lengthening to very quick shortening, because there's that in-between cycle. So if we can minimize that time between, then we're on the right track to being excessively, or not excessively, but very highly amounted of plyometric base. All right. What we're trying to do is, like it says there, we're trying to produce high levels of ground reactive force. Those ground reaction forces are the ability that we transition from moving basically at a very high rate of speed to absorbing force again and then moving at a high rate of speed again. All right, so that's where we want to do it. We want to be able to minimize the amount of ground surface time that we have to be able to explode and do it again. The way that we want to think about plyometrics, let's talk about a basketball player, for example. They're always the really good ones there. You watch a basketball player, they go up, they shoot a layup, they miss it. They land and they're like, oh man, I missed that shot. And they jump right back up again. So they land and then jump right back up again to get their missed shot, to get an offensive rebound. And then they land and they miss that shot again. And then they land, jump back up to try to get a third attempt. And then the third attempt, they dunk it home. Well, that's plyometric, because you're, again, minimizing the amount of time that is being taken to go down. Okay, to down meaning absorb the force to then explode up into into whatever you're trying to do. Volleyball players are a good example of that. They'll they'll jump, they'll block, they'll land, they'll go up for a spike. It's natural for them to do it, but it's a very quick sequence. Okay? So the one other aspect here, if you look down at the bottom, it is important for the fitness professional to understand that individual clients must possess adequate core strength, joint stability, and range of motion, and can balance effectively or inefficiently to get us to be plyometric. Bottom line with that statement, we do not want beginners to be using a high level of plyometric training. Can we introduce them to things? Sure. Do we want them to be doing 24-inch jump offs to land to jump back up onto a 24-inch box? No. So we're going to modify that, and we're going to cue it to make sure that we give them the right training. That is the key for this. New people are not going to take the advantage that we would hope that, or that we can give them. They need to understand they have to build up to that point to then be able to adjust and be able to perform these plyometric exercises. All right. So there again, rate of force production, that's basically saying here that it's our muscles can exert maximum amount of force output in a very short period of time. If you notice that max force, minimal amount of time, that relates a lot to what we would term power. Okay. So plyometrics is very powerful. All right. And that's key because we're having explosive actions, and there's that term I was talking about before, stretch shortening, right down in here. That stretch shortening cycle is what I explained in the previous slide, where we're trying to minimize the amount of time in between the eccentric land and the concentric move. Okay, and we're always working on that. Now, if you notice in the slide here, though, this is where core stabilization, neuromuscular stabilization, all of these things are going to come into play because we need them to be able to function in the best plyometric manner possible. So there it is, eccentric, armatization, concentric, preload, transition, and then basically the response to those previous ones. And what we're going to do is we're going to take, for the concentric, we are going to take what we would call stored elastic energy and transfer that to be able to fly. All right, by fly, jump, maneuver. And now don't forget here, when we talk about plyometrics, it's not just jumping. It's an ability to also create change in direction. So even if, a football player, think about a wide receiver. They go up, they jump, they catch the ball, they land, and they immediately make a move. That's plyometric. All right. And so that's a way that they can maneuver as well. So it's not just jump to jump to jump. Those are ways that we can train it, but that's not exactly always what it is. It can be a land to a cut, and that's a plyometric move. Okay. Because you're taking, again, an eccentric land followed by a very rapid concentric lateral movement. Okay. So there they are again, a little bit more in depth on this here. If you look, eccentric, stored elastic energy, you're stimulating the muscle spindles. Remember, the muscle spindle is the detector of stretch. Okay, so they're trying to see what the stretch is, the stretch of the agonist, that lengthening component. The armatization, where it says the nerves meet the synapse and the spinal cord. And basically what you're doing is you're having the sensory signal sent to the spinal cord. Armatization is that in between where the spinal cord and brain basically say, okay, this is what I got to do. The signal gets sent back to the muscles to then say, okay, force produce. Okay, and then you have your shortening of that agonist muscle. Now remember, agonist, that's another term for prime mover. If you're doing a squat base or a jump base, we know that our prime mover is a quadricep. Okay, so that's what we're looking to do there. So why is this important? Again, we want to increase rate of force production. We want to increase the amount of motor unit recruitment. And by doing that, it allows us to know when our body should turn on and turn off certain things. Now, if it's plyometric and we know that we need more motor units, our body knows to call on it. If it's a strength movement, it's going to call upon the motor units it needs. But if we're more plyometric, more powerful, our motor unit recruitment is exactly what we need for it to happen, because that means that you're going to keep things turned off unless they need it. Okay. But what is it good for? Overall strength, still can improve strength. We can get better core stability, and we can definitely improve our balance capabilities and our coordination. Okay. So really the bottom line here with our training is that we want to be able to learn how to react fast. Okay. We want to be able to, have a more coordinated manner of eccentric, armatization, concentric, contraction. We want to have all of those happen in sequence. So when a person first starts learning how to land, you're going to see that they're going to spend a lot more time absorbing force. And then as they get better, they're able to land, absorb the force, and then immediately move in the manner you want them to be. Okay. So what ends up happening with that is you have better biomechanics. Okay. You end up with a better functional movement pattern. Okay, all of those things make a difference. So eventually what we end up with is better neuromuscular efficiency, meaning that you're going to have good nerve to muscle interaction, and you're going to be able to increase the speed of processing and signal sending by the CNS, or the central nervous system. That's very, very important. And that only leads to greater skill improvement. It doesn't even have to be just for an athlete. It can be for anybody. Okay, it's better skill improvement, better maneuvering under less stressful conditions, meaning like in a muscular endurance condition, a strength condition, so we can improve other facets as well. So when we do this, we have to understand that, again, we have to show the right amounts of strength, core stability, and core strength, and then balance, a little bit of coordination before we can get them to that point. The other aspect here is that we need to think about the person, and meaning that they need to be, again, can they handle certain training surfaces? I can tell you right now, and I know a lot of you probably understand this, is that, concrete is very, very taxing on the body. So are we using the right training surface? Are we using a grass field? Are we using a basketball court? Are we using a tartan track? Now, tartan is basically that hybrid rubber, okay? So, that has a little bit more spring to it. Are they wearing the right footwear? I am going to be 100% honest here. This is a major factor in injury. Okay? This is one of those things that happens where proper training shoes are vastly important for plyometrics. If you think that a pair of running shoes are going to do the job, they have different types of support than a training or conditioning shoe does. Basketball players, why do you think that basketball players wear basketball shoes? They have to have specific support for their ankles and their feet so that they can maneuver and cut and jump and land and have good support, especially laterally. So training plyometric barefoot may not be the best alternative for you. Okay? The other thing here is the intensity. Intensity for plyometrics is high. So can these individuals keep moving in a higher intensity manner? Also understand that we know this. We've already talked about this, where with plyometrics, or actually with anything really, when intensity goes up, volume must go down. So we have to make sure that we adjust to that. Okay? But what is our volume? Our volume is expressed in things like numbers of foot contact. So if you're doing something with like ladder drills or jumps, okay, throws, catches, right, all of those are going to make a difference. And volume is based off of intensity. So if intensity is down, volume can go up. If intensity is up, volume must go down. Okay, but in this case, intensity is up because plyometrics is not a faint of heart. It's not a low intensity base. Okay. The other aspect too is, like it says here, a general recommendation is to allow at least 1 day between intense plyometric training sessions. Definitely agree with that because it is very taxing on the nervous system. So because it's very taxing on the nervous system, we have to be aware that this is gonna, it's gonna keep. Basically, it's just going to keep our people too intensified, and that can lead to injury from overtraining. Now that takes a little bit of time, but you understand where we're going with that, is that you have to have that rest day because we need the recovery to get the best results possible. All right. And then, like it says here on the bottom, 48 to 72 hours between sessions for novice individuals, those who are not as well equipped for this. So again, with everything integrated based, we always want to use all 3 planes of motion. We want to use varying amounts of sets and varying amounts of reps, okay? And by using these variables correctly, we can adjust to make sure that we get optimal results out of our people, okay? Another guideline, we're going to go on that continuum of slow to explosive. And then, with the safety aspect of it, again, supportive shoes, proper training surfaces, and proper supervision. If you have a person who you're kind of worried about and is like, I don't really trust them doing it on their own, then make sure they're doing plyometrics in a supervised manner only. If you have athletes who you feel comfortable with, or regular exercisers you feel comfortable with doing stuff on their own, have at it. That's okay, but you have to be able to supervise them accordingly, depending upon what you're doing. So another set of progressions here: easy to hard, low to high amplitude. Amplitude meaning how often it's occurring. So things like hurdle drills. If you set up 12 hurdles in a row, an athlete will be able to handle 12 hurdles that are maybe just say 12 inches off the ground. A novice or beginner would not be able to handle that 12-inch hop to land, but then once you land, immediately jump over the next one. Those are important to understand. So the amplitude has to be adjusted, low to high. Simple to complex, known to unknown. Start them off with things that they know and progress them to things that are like, oh, I've never done this before. And that's okay because it's, again, a learning tool. Body weight to then loaded. You can do loaded plyometrics, which also helps. And then it has to be activity specific, meaning that if you're going to train somebody who wants to get better at baseball, then we want to give them the right plyometric tools for baseball, basketball, volleyball, football, hockey. You can go down the line. And then general training, we can we can work on plyometrics for things like, falling. We can work it, for going up and down stairs to adjust for that. So we can help them plyometrically in many different facets to help them in their everyday lives as well. So initially we want to involve smaller jumps with lower amplitude. Okay. And that will show that progression. All right. So like it says here, they're designed to establish optimal landing mechanics. That's one of the major things that I feel is underrated when it comes to plyometrics, is that many people don't know how to land correctly and adjust to, once they land, how do they maneuver in the opposite manner, right? Landing mechanics is going to be critical. So even just starting off, like it says here, a squat jump with a stabilization. What you're doing there is you're having them do a squat, release their feet from the ground, land in a stabilized manner, meaning that this is going to work on proper posture. It's going to work on decelerating correctly, eccentric strength, and it's going to work on the complete mechanics of how to land. All right, a squat jump with a landing stabilization and a partial squat is appropriate. Then a box jump, or actually let's decipher the two. Box jump up, so jump up onto the box, land in a stabilized manner. Jump down off the box, not a high jump, but even step off with a proper landing. And then multi-planar, so you can then go from sagittal to frontal to transverse. Now, frontal would be a lateral jump. Transverse would be that rotational jump. And then you're, again, no matter what direction, what plane of motion you use, that stabilization must come in at the end. The progression then goes into what we call progression 2, squat jumps. All right, repeated squat jumps. Lunge jumps. In a lunge position, we're lunging. Tuck jumps, where we're basically squat jumping, but then tucking our knees up as high as they can, closest to our chest. butt kicks, those are exactly what they sound like. You're taking your heels and trying to connect them with your glutes. And then power step ups are a little bit different, where you up onto a box. What you're going to do is you're going to step onto that box, press into that box, and be able to press up and jump, releasing the foot from the box, land on it, and then step back down, and then rotating sides. So again, we're involving more progression of speed, amplitude, and dynamic motion. Now we're not just stationary, we're going to go into movement. So now we're working on joint stabilization. We're continuing our progression of eccentric strength. We're improving our rate of force production. So you're going to do a squat jump, land, squat jump, force production, ground reactive force. And then we're working again on that coordination aspect. And then lastly, we're going to really get into a more powerful, more explosive dynamic movement. Okay, we're going to continue to improve our rate of force production. We're going to continue to improve our eccentric strength, our deceleration. We're going to continue to improve our reactive joint stabilization and continue to move fast and explosively. All of those things are going to come into play for things like ice skaters. Sometimes you see them called skater jumps. Those are those lateral side to side where you bring the leg, like almost like you're skating, and you're really trying to push off on the outside leg to then counter to the other side, decelerate, and then do it again. Single leg power step ups. So we're only using one leg now, or we're not combining the two. Proprioceptive plyometrics are now where you have to understand the direction that you're going to be told to go into. You're basically going to land, and then a coach or a trainer or somebody is going, basically the fitness professional is going to tell you what manner to go into. Depth jumps, depth meaning more out than up. So you're going to land and jump outward. And then plyometric push-ups. Now we're talking about upper body. Now there are plyometric push-ups. If you have more advanced people, there's plyometric pull-ups. There's plyometric handstand push-ups. There are a lot of aspects that can come with the upper that are a little bit more or a lot more challenging that maybe many people cannot handle. But that's not a bad thing, because that's a point of reference to get to for your people. Okay? So plyometric training, like I said, it's a very short chapter, but understand that these plyometric progressions, look into these exercises a little bit more, see what they entail, understand how the deceleration occurs, understand where the force production comes into, understand where the reactive joint stabilization is, understand where the fast and explosiveness comes into for all of these movements. Except for the first progression, that's more about really understanding landing mechanics and being optimal in your posture. Those are going to come in critically, because it's only going to enhance your landing capabilities for progression 2 and then definitely for progression 3. All right? So take your variables into account. Okay? And use the terminology that we've talked about previously. You want to let your people know what a stretch shortening cycle is, because when they understand that, then they can understand that they're trying to minimize the amount of time from when they land to when they move, and let them understand what's happening with their muscles and their nervous system as well, so that they have a better understanding of what it is that you're calling upon for them. Okay? So that's chapter 18. That's plyometric training. I don't want to say it's in a nutshell, because there's a lot involved in it, but it's definitely something that we can work with, that all of our people can do. But again, for beginners, we need to progress them into learning the basics before we can get to this more aggressive stance. So I appreciate you guys all listening. I hope you've listened to everything up to this point, and we'll be hearing chapter 19 real soon. Take care.